Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Power Hour, where we jam 60 minutes of thought-provoking discussion into a 30-minute show designed to inform, awaken, and protect our fellow American citizens. Host Tom Scott and Sarah Nahidi, and today we are very pleased to have with us Greg Hession of MassOutrage.com, an organization dedicated to exposing the corruption in the Massachusetts family court system and helping people in that state and elsewhere advocate for themselves. So, Greg, if you would, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background for our viewers. We like to do this with our guests because it kind of gives a nice cross-section blend of walks of life that have been experienced the system.
Sure. Appreciate being able to be here. I
Absolutely
came late to the legal profession. I was a salesman for many years, and I decided I'd like to go to law school and fix the world, and that didn't really work. So I did go at night and kept working during the day and got my law license in 1993. I'm in Western Massachusetts and went into the legal profession. And I guess with just about everybody who does this, it's completely different than you'd ever would have known. When you get out of law school, you look back and say, wait a minute, they didn't teach me anything about how to practice law, and they didn't teach me anything about how nasty the legal system was. So, I've sort of specialized in family law as well as civil and criminal litigation, and do some constitutional work as well. So I have a pretty good cross-section. And the one thing that I think has helped me the most is I've been in almost all of the courthouses in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There's 100 of them. So I've had a good cross-section of the way that the system works, really from the inside. And I think that that allows me to see a lot of data points. And when I generalize about things, it's really based on a very large base of information that I've taken over the last 23 years in doing this.
Greg, I totally.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. That's actually a good point, Greg, about 100 courthouses, and you've experienced a lot of them, because people can go into one courthouse and have a bad experience, and you really can't say the system's corrupt. I mean, yes, it is, but you really can't make that judgment at that point. So that's really, really good information for our viewers to kind of weigh and consider what you're saying in this discussion,
I hope it will be helpful. And so I'm going to probably have to generalize. It's the only way you can often do this. But I'm also willing to give some specific instances of some really sort of toe-curling cases I've run into recently, just to give an example of how things are difficult in the system. So whatever I can do to be of help to your viewers to sort of survive the experience if they get thrown into the legal system. One of my favorite legal quotes, I think, of all time is from Charles Dickens in his novel Bleak House. And he has a character say, and he's pointing to the Chancery Court, which is similar to our family court, but it also dealt with estates and some other things. And he says, "Suffer any wrong be done to you rather than go there." And that's how I feel about the legal system, frankly. If there's any way to stay away, you should stay away.
And Greg, I totally agree with you that as lawyers, we don't get prepared at all for what the legal system is like and what practice is like. And I advise my clients the same thing. I said, if we can keep this out of the court system, we're all better off, because once we're in there, we have no control over what's happening.
One of the wisest things that Jesus said about the legal system was settle with your opponent on the way to court. He knew something then. It was the same then, 2,000 years ago. It's this. I think every legal system of all time has always had this same affliction. They just don't work. And ours is no different. Even though we had a noble experiment that attempted to transcend that and do better, I think we've really kind of descended back to just the usual corruption and the usual human foibles and follies that seem to follow any government process. So
it's funny too what you say about Christ was on the planet. I mean, the authors write about that in the Bible, about how corrupt it was, and The same thing they saw then 2,000 years ago, we're seeing today. It hasn't improved. Nothing. It might have even gotten worse, right? Certainly hasn't improved.
Well, and one, of course, is reminded of Jesus's trial himself. That didn't work out so well either. A lot of false witnesses. A verdict based on hearsay. The history repeats itself. Let's say that.
Right.
And Greg, what was it that made you get into the legal system, and what was your impression going in to the profession versus?
Well, I thought that I could, quote, make a difference. I think everybody has that sort of aspiration, and I wanted to bring some justice. I saw a giant government that was rolling over people and just harming many, many people in a lot of ways. And I felt very strongly about, for example, the issue of free speech. I saw a lot of my friends who were in the pro-life movement getting arrested or harmed because they were simply out on the sidewalk with an unpopular viewpoint. I saw the taxing authorities putting people in jail all the time for not complying with the impossible to understand tax code. These sorts of things made me believe that there was something out of control. Now, I had no idea at that time till I went to law school and then went out and actually saw the system from the inside. I didn't even know a tenth of it. It was way worse than whatever motivated me to go to law school. And, many times I wanted to just quit because it's horrifying. What people deal with in this system is terrible. The problems that bring people into the system are terrible. And then the system itself is terrible. It does not bring justice, and it comes back to that same quote, suffer any wrong to be done to you rather than go there. I always tell the clients, and they don't even think it's funny, well, if you want justice, the last place I go is the court system. And they don't get it.
Yeah.
But once they go to court once, they get it. The first time they walk into the place, suddenly, I thought he was just being an idiot, but no, he was telling the truth. So.
Yeah, we read about that, and we say, happens in the legal system. It's not because of the system, but in spite of it that it happens. So you just pretty much drove home what we've said.
Yeah, and so much of what's happening now in the system is an inversion of what the founders really wanted. The federal incentives in virtually every single aspect of, for example, family law is one of the worst. They subsidize the child support collection system. They subsidize the taking of children out of families by Department of Children and Families or Child Protective Services. So they incentivize an awful lot of unjust behavior. And on top of that, they've given judges and prosecutors and almost everybody else in the system this thing we call immunity. A lot of people watching may not know what that term means, but essentially it means that you can't sue them. They can do anything they want, practically short of coming off the bench and burying a hatchet in your head, and you cannot sue them for almost anything. And this immunity, it was something that we came to this country and started a different type of legal system. And I wanted to read, and I don't want to read too much here, but I've got this one sentence from our Massachusetts Constitution that's just so illuminating. It was written by John Adams, our second president. And this is how he phrased it in our Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, which is one of the oldest. It predated the federal Constitution. And our Article 5 says, all power residing originally in the people and being derived from them, the several magistrates and officers of government vested with authority, whether legislative, executive, or judicial, meaning absolutely everybody in every department, are their substitutes and agents, and here's the money quote, and are at all times accountable to them. So there should be no immunity. When a public servant, whether a clerk or a judge or a prosecutor or anybody in that system of government at any level or in any department does something improper that violates the constrictions in the Constitution or the law, they should be subject to redress. Now, the problem, I guess, is going to be who will then be the referee for that, because when the system judges the system, you don't get justice. it's who's going to be the outside referee to decide how these people will be accountable. It doesn't work so well.
Yeah, yeah. Jefferson summed it up right when he said, "Who will govern the governors?" Right. I mean, that quote to I forget who it was in 1821. He basically said, you know, who's going to govern these? It's got to be the people. Otherwise, you're not going to get justice, just like you said, right?
And so much of law now, and this is the thing that I think one of the takeaways that I would like to make sure that anybody looking at this understands. We set up our system with three parts to separate power. We have a judicial and executive and a legislative branch so that no one could gain power over the other. But what happens is they did an end run. They did a trick. And they've said, aha, we're going to totally get outside this, and we're going to make the biggest power reside in a fourth branch of government. And it's called the administrative branch, or the agencies, or the whatever you want to call it. But what they've done is all of these non-judicial, non-executive, non-legislative things, such as the Federal Drug Administration, the Food and Drug Administration, the FCC, the FAA, all these alphabet agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, and all the ones on the state level, the Child Protective Services, they all have exercised all three powers, the judicial, legislative, and executive. And they have their own little courts, and they judge themselves. So nobody's watching the store. They're completely immune. And if you don't like their decisions, you don't get judicial review of their decisions unless you go through a terribly tortured process. So much of what the average American is going to see in law today is going to be in interaction with an agency. For example, if you have a wetland on your property, the Conservation Commission or the wetlands people are going to come after you. If you have a tax issue, the IRS is going to come after you. If almost anything that you deal with the government, you're dealing with an agency. Not one of the real typical parts of the government that was actually set up constitutionally. And it's impossible. They're like talking to a piece of granite. And again, they're immune and they're unresponsive. And so this is why I think our impression, and almost everybody in America's impression, of government just being fossilized and tyrannical is really true. And my experience has been that trying to get an agency to do something is almost impossible.
And Greg, when you talk about how these agencies are incentivized, you had mentioned that briefly. Can you explain that to our viewers and why and how that came about?
Yeah, one good example that I'm very familiar with is the child protection services of the different states. Every state has their own child protection agency, and they're all called different things. In Massachusetts, Department of Children and Families. Some are called DSS, Department of Social Services. California, it's Child Protective Services. So what happened is in the 70s, they passed a federal law, and this is how everything works now, whether it's for cabbage or red suspenders or child protection. This is the exact pattern. The feds say, we have a problem. We have to do something about this. So they pass a law. Let's pass a law. That'll fix it, which of course it doesn't. But in this case, they passed what they call the Child Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Act. This was under Walter Mondale's tutelage when he was in the Senate. And it gave federal money to all of the various states if they would put together an agency in each of the states that complied with a pattern that the feds wanted. And the various components of that pattern: number one, you had to have a snitch hotline, for example, so that people could report alleged child abuse. This is akin to what Cuba does. They have something they call the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution on every block in Cuba. And if one of your neighbors is doing something that would be against the state, you snitch on your neighbor. And this is what our snitch hotlines are required to do by this federal law. But by doing that, you get the federal cash to put that together. So every state immediately rushed to put this sort of a process in place. And you do a number of other things. They have to have foster care according to certain prescribed issues, and you have to have certain laws and a whole process of child protection that follows a pattern that they've set out very carefully. And there's a big, gigantic and totally unknown bureaucracy called the Administration for Children and Families under the Health and Human Services Department that funnels these train loads of cash to every one of the states and put all of these crushing requirements on the states to put together their departments. That's how everything works. And so every state rushed to do it in the 70s, and they put their departments together just like they were supposed to, got the money. Now, here's the catch. They said, you have to comply with 7 criteria, and we're going to evaluate you every 2 or 3 years and make sure you're complying with them. No state has ever complied once, ever, in this whole time. Not one. Massachusetts, I think, complies with 1 of the 7, and they still get the money because it's really not about, it's not about helping children. It's about money. It's money and jobs and power. And if the feds say, well, we have a red suspenders problem, red suspenders are unsafe, we got to pass a law, they will do exactly the same thing and cause a red suspenders agency to have to be created in every state. I mean, this is the way, no matter what it is, whether it's in agriculture or environment or highways, they imposed, for example, they said you now have to have a 0.08 limit on alcohol if you're going to continue to receive highway funds. So everything is done this way, no matter what aspect of the law you're talking about. It's all federal incentivizing. So if we're ever going to fix this, we can't just do it on the local level. It really, there's so much pressure from Washington that's unseen, completely behind the scenes, that in order to really fix this in a systemic way, we're going to have to go there.
And what do you see as some solutions, or I mean, what are the ways that you propose to fix this? You're talking about the national level. I mean, how do we propose and execute change at the national level?
I don't think we can. The Congress get greased by all of these lobbies, and they're vast amounts of money that they pour into the congressional coffers, and it's all done semi-legally. Some of it's done completely illegally. Every so often they'll catch somebody. Like they caught this Representative Corrine Brown the other day, who was convicted in Florida of accepting money illegally for her charity. Of course, the Clintons were notorious for that, right? They had a great scam going. You know, all that money got funneled into their little foundation that was helping the children, you know, for the children.
And paying for Chelsea's wedding. Yeah,
exactly. So there's ways, legal and illegal, to get money to some of these people. But until that system changes, how are we ever going to fix it? Because, for example, say I wanted to crusade against the unjust ways that child protection is going on in our state of Massachusetts, and I really do think it's not working well at all. It's terrible. What can I do? Well, as long as they're receiving $1 billion a year or whatever reimbursement from the feds, they're not going to change anything. Why would they? So where do we go? You can't do it from below. It really has to be from both below and above at the same time.
Right, Greg. Now, if I can ask a question, have you ever personally fallen victim to the system, or is there a story that you can share with our viewers just to show how outrageous the courts are in Massachusetts? I mean, is there anyone? I mean, you can change the names, of course, to. But I mean, can you share with?
Oh, sure.
That's either happened.
You know, I don't have a personal story, and I didn't go into this because I had, you know, I'm getting my revenge or something for something that was done to me. The people that I work for have experienced such horrible injustice that, I mean, any human would look at that and say, I've got to do this. I've got to do something to fight this. But I mean, it's amazing how absurd the various cases that I sometimes see. For example, I'll give you one in a child protection just to show you. Very recently, a woman had about a 10-year-old son and was living with a partner unmarried in a home, and the Department of Children and Families thought that the man she was living with who had a very common name, was another person by that name who was a person who had been convicted of a sex offense. They said to him, you got to get out. And he said, I'm not that guy. And they said, you got to get out or we're going to take the child. We'll come in. And the way they do it, by the way, just as a brief aside to show you how horrifying this is, They have these roving bands of child kidnappers that go out at night. And when I say nights, you know, that they work from like till midnight, and they come with police, bang your door down, literally take it off the hinges if you don't open it. I mean literally take it off the hinges. And they will go in with the gun and stick it in your face and pry the little children out of your arms. That's child protection. And so
it's going to be terrifying for the kids.
It's terrifying. And this is so emotionally abusive for kids. So anyway, obviously the mother wanted to avoid this thing. So the man gallantly, even though he was not the person that they said, he left. And then they dropped the subject. And months went by. He got me. I had to sue them to even get their attention so that they would go back and they went, oh, I guess you aren't that guy. Ha! So 4 months out of his home, nobody was paying attention. Nobody cared. And he could have been 4 years out of his home before somebody ever looked at it. But this is typically the kind of a thing that happens. And you know, but there's, here's another one. In a child protection situation, a young mother had a little baby. He was only 4 months old, and the child fell ill. She took the child to a hospital because there was something not right, and she perceived that the child just didn't look right. So they airlifted him to Boston. They said, oh, he has what's called a subdural hematoma. Now, a subdural hematoma is an internal bleeding, and it often comes from shaken baby. They immediately said, oh, you shook your baby. They kicked her out of the hospital, did not let her see her child, and put her and immediately took custody of this child on an emergency basis without any involvement or any involvement with her. So here's what happened. A couple weeks later, a doctor looked again at the x-rays or the MRI, whatever they did. And he said, ooh, we got this wrong. This wasn't a subdural hematoma. So therefore, the mother had done nothing. And you know what they did? The Child Protection Agency hid this. They knew this. They sent this memorandum to the Child Protection Agency, and the Child Protection Agency, despite being asked 3 times by me and 2 motions in court to force them to give me the information, refused. And for 7 months, this woman had her child falsely accused of having injured her child, and they withheld the information that they absolutely knew this child was not injured. So this is the sort of thing that happens. And think how banal this is. This isn't spectacular. It's just the grinding day-to-day way that the system works on just about every case. And I'm sure that you folks have probably seen the same sort of thing. You know, this isn't spectacular stuff. It's just little creepy people who make bad decisions and don't give a care, essentially. And that's what causes most of this. It's very reminiscent of the way the Soviet system worked. It was just the apparatchiks ground out the people and they didn't care. And so everybody suffered because nothing mattered. And that's what we're kind of getting to.
But what would be the incentive and reason why, you know, the Department of Child Services would hide and not want to turn over that information?
Oh, money. Every day that goes by, they get money, federal money. And as long as they certify that the child was necessary to keep in care, there's reimbursement from the feds. We were discussing earlier that everything's incentivized. Whatever you incentivize, you get more of. And so the more children that they can keep in care. And just one statistic that's horrifying, there are 500,000 children in our country right now that are in foster care at any one time. 500,000 kids are out of the parents' home and in some sort of state care right now at any one day. Massachusetts, we're sort of a median state population-wise, we have 11,000 at any one time in our little state here.
And when you sue them, I mean, is there a way to recover monetary damages for her being wrongfully taken away from her child for 7 months?
Well, I'm thinking about trying to do that, but here's the problem. Again, it's immunity. They very often give immunity to all of these social workers for using discretionary, for using their discretion. Now, this may have been a deliberate deceit, but maybe they'll say, oh, we didn't know. Maybe we didn't see that memo or whatever. They'll have some excuse. the guy that was kicked out of his house for 4 months, he certainly suffered damages. You know, he had to find alternative living for 4 months and meals and everything else, and that's expensive. So yeah, there were actual damages. What is the damage to this mother? There was no monetary damage. It was emotional. This little baby, 4-month-old baby, lost the opportunity to bond with his mother during this whole time. It's horrible. Well, what is that worth? How do you put a price on that? I don't know what you do. Nothing will fix it. You know, money won't fix it.
Yeah.
How will the money make mom happy? It won't, because it won't bring back that time.
Let me ask you this, Greg. Have you, you've been practicing law now, People's Republic of Massachusetts, for a little over 2 decades. Have you seen a decline over that time, since when you started back in '93 versus now? Has it accelerated? I mean, it gotten worse, gotten better? What have you seen with your own eyes in that time span?
I think some things are better and some things are worse. They have a slightly better administrative control of the system now than they did before. That's actually slightly better because they started hiring some professionals to manage it. And so waiting times are slightly shorter. There were times when it would take 5-6 years just for a case to go through. And now it takes less than that. Not that that's good, but so some of that's better. A lot is worse, though. At the very highest levels, they impose their political agenda on the law all the time, and they legislate from the bench. We're in the forefront of that. And whatever you think about the gay marriage issue, we legislated that from the bench long before the United States Supreme Court did. And our Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court was attending gay rights rallies and groups and going to these very radical feminist organizations and whatnot. The very people that were appearing in front of her, she was allying with, being part of, speaking to, accepting fees from. And I mean, this is just the corruption of that sort of thing is just astounding. And nobody raised any ruckus except for a few of us on the fringe. So the corruption is just as much there. I don't really see a lot of difference that way. I think it's hurling its way through like it always does toward you know, more and more tyranny all the time. So, but that's a very slow slouch. It isn't immediate. It just goes little by little.
Okay. Yeah. So the tyranny itself, you've seen decline over the last couple of decades, right? The overall.
Oh, yes. Because law has expanded more and more. There's more and more things that the law seems to apply to. And then, for example, if you take a law like the restraining order, the domestic abuse restraining order law, they keep applying it to more and more things so that more of the citizens are subject to its authority. So that process is getting way worse because they just keep expanding the scope and authority of the law. I think there was probably a time in this country when you could go through your entire life without ever seeing a courtroom or having somebody from the government ever have any contact with you. And that just is rarely the case anymore. They nail you somehow.
Yeah. We're just about out of time. Is there any other questions you'd like to ask Greg, Sarah? Is there anything that we missed?
So one of the things I was thinking about was, you know, you mentioned about how these government agencies, you know, operate in every capacity, every branch, you know, executive, judicial, legislative. I mean, I know for Tom and I, we see big government as the source and the root of all the problems, not all of the problems, but many of the problems in the legal system. Do you agree that, you know, big government and government being a part of every aspect of our lives is the root and cause of the issues that you see with the legal system?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. And I think that that's always been the case, though. It always has the tendency to grow and grow. no matter how we've tried, nobody has ever been able to contain government. And you can look back and study history and look at every empire, every nation that's lasted for a while, and they've tried and they've always failed. Government just grows, grows, grows. For some reason, the people who are incentivized to grab power do so. The wrong kinds of people rise. And this most recent, I think, and probably the most pernicious thing that we've seen happen is this rise of the agencies, like I said, where you can't even really get, it's like wrestling a giant marshmallow. You can't stop their rolling over people. And I think it's the agencies that have had this most authoritative and tyrannical effect over everybody. Because they're the ones that are the most likely to come at you about doing something, whether it's taxes or property rights or your children or something of that sort. And yet they're the least responsive because of the way they've set these things up. There's almost no redress available. So that's terrible. If there was some redress, maybe it'd be okay, but there isn't. You're stuck pretty much.
And how do you scale back government? I mean, it just seems like the government, like you said, keeps getting bigger and bigger. How do we scale back and say, hey, the government does not need to be and should not be a part of every aspect of our lives?
Well, people want it to be. This
Why?
is scary. Well, because people love safety more than they love liberty, to sort of paraphrase Ben Franklin. And they've always liked that. People much prefer safety to liberty. If you can, a person, for example, in a very generous welfare state like Massachusetts, if you go for the whole parasite package, you can be earning $75,000 a year tax-free, virtually everything you've ever wanted. All you got to do is go down and say you're poor, and it's unbelievable how much you can get. So there's always, when the government offers people this dependency, many people are going to accept dependency because there's a lot of benefits to that. Those of us who say absolutely not, freedom is not worth the price of dependency, we're getting fewer and fewer, I think. And I don't know what to do about that, but we have a society that's accepted this condition. With a very few exceptions. We're at the fringe now. We're not the mainstream anymore.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's the kind of liberalism, right? I mean, myself, I'm a libertarian. I say, get rid of just about all of government. But what you're saying is, when you say people want it, I mean, that's somewhat facetious, but certainly a good majority of the American public who are getting the benefits that you mentioned, this is good for them, right? I mean, it's like, if it's free, it's for me, I guess is the saying. And the other thing I want to mention too is about these agencies and how they kind of have this bad, ominous, overarching control over everything. We actually write about it in the book, and I don't think many people are aware, like the NOAA, the National Oceanographic Administration, the NSA, all these other government agencies, they're heavily armed now. They're getting rounds and rounds of munitions stockpiled, over the last few years. And these are I mean, why would the national, NOAA need or weaponry, right? But this is happening. And this is, we cite this from many sources in our book. And this is over the last several decades. So these agencies are not just something that are kind of off to the side, they're never going to bother you. This is happening. We don't know what it is, but certainly, when you start arming agencies and, with rounds and thousands of rounds of ammunition of various sizes, that's a dangerous thing.
Well, if we took the Fourth Amendment seriously, for example, and that's the one that says there should be no searches or seizures without a warrant, look at what we have with the NSA and everybody violating this on an everyday basis for everybody. They're now usurping all of our phone calls and emails and everything. The second largest building right now that the government owns is something called the National Geospatial Administration. Nobody even knows it's there. That's the equivalent of the NSA from the air. And they're watching everything we do every day. And they have an almost unlimited black budget to see everything that everybody does always. just like, and you know, they built this multi-billion-dollar building out in Utah to monitor all internet and whatnot. And now they have this whole satellite system that's now monitoring us all from the air visually as well. You know, how are we ever going to turn this back when they've ratcheted it up so much into an Orwellian complete control of virtually absolute, just like she said, virtually everything we do now is controlled in some way. I despair that we're going to be able to ratchet that back, because ratchets seem to only go one way. I certainly intend to keep standing as long as I'm able and fighting, but only when a critical mass of people decide to not accept this anymore, I think, will it ever change.
Right. And I don't know if people are aware that data center you mentioned in Utah, that multi-billion-dollar data center, which went live, I believe, a couple of years ago.
Yes.
It tracks every email, every phone call, every electronic correspondence by every person. I don't know how many thousands of terabytes. It might even be exabytes of petabytes. I mean, it's just ridiculous the amount of data storage capability in this billion-dollar facility.
Yes, it's horrible. And when we have enough people that are not going to accept this sort of large government is the only time it's ever going to start turning back. But you take, for example, the congressional delegation from Massachusetts, every one of them are ultra left-wing, big government, let's spy on everybody people. You know, my whole state is contributing mightily to the to the decline of our freedom on a daily basis. I don't know how we stop this. I really don't.
Yeah, it's a bad thing. Well, I'd like to conclude the show, and certainly this has been an excellent discussion, Greg. I would love to thank you. Show, it's been informative, not only for the residents that, you know, are your neighbors in Massachusetts, but I think for everyone nationwide. We're certainly going to have you back, I think. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
So, yeah. So I'd like to tell everyone, of course, thank you to our guest, Greg Hession, attorney in Massachusetts. Everyone watching, catch our show fresh every first Monday of the month at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, or feel free to view it anytime afterward right here on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our blog for informative monthly posts at www.stloiyf.com. And if you want to protect yourself to the fullest extent possible against our corrupt legal system, a copy of our book, Stack the Legal Odds in Your Favor. And please use the link below this video to support our partner, Greg Hession, who is running the website massoutrage.com, if I'm not mistaken. It will help support his efforts in the corruption and helping people in Massachusetts as well. So do I have that website correct, Greg? That is massoutrage.com, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's pretty much it. So once again, thank you very much, Greg, for being on the show, and we look forward to having you again.
Good day now.